Welcome to another video on the C programming video series for beginners. In this video, we will talk about how we can use a single scanf function to read multiple values and to store the values in multiple variables. Now, in the previous tutorial, we have discussed about the scanf function, how we can use it and how we can take the user input and store values in a variable. Now here what I have done is I have written a very simple program. I have declared a variable of type integer and I have called this variable as age, and I will store a value of 1 in this variable, and then we are using this scanf function. We are reading an integer value and we are storing that in this age variable. Remember, we are using the address of operator and getting the address of this variable age in this scanf function. And then by using the printf, we are displaying the value that we have read from the user. Now here, if I run this program, the program will just wait for me to enter some value. But if we give this program to an end user, then he may not know what kind of value he has to enter. Now here, what we can do is we can use the printf before taking the input and we can display appropriate messages to the user. For example, here I will use a printf statement and here I will say enter your age. Now if I save this program and if I run this, then what happens? The program will display this message and then it will wait for me to enter something in my keyboard. For someone who is using this program, they know what kind of value the program is expecting. So here I have to enter my age. I will enter my age, and then if I hit the enter button, the program displays the output, which is the value that we have read from the user. Now here in this scanf function, we are reading one value and we are storing that in a variable. Now what if we have to read multiple values in our program? Now one thing that we can do is we can use this scanf function multiple times. For example, I can do something like this. I can display the message enter your height, and then I can read the value from the user, and then I can store that in another variable, something like this. And now here I will have the height variable. Now what we are doing is, first we are asking the user to enter his age, and then we are asking the user to enter his height. We are reading multiple values, but for that we are using this scanf function multiple times. Now you guys can do this and it is perfectly fine. In many situations where we have to read different types of values, this is a preferred method. Here with every input we can display a message to the user. User can understand what type of value he has to enter, and then he can provide the value. Now in some situations in our program, we may want to read multiple values in one go. That is also possible. Now here what I have done is I have created three variables, num1, num2 and num3. All of them are of type integer. Now what if I want to read the input from the user for these three variables in one go using one scanf function? We can do that also. For that, I will simply use a printf statement in here, and I will say enter three integers so that the user can understand what kind of values he can enter, and then we can use the scanf function. Remember, with the scanf function, here we will specify the format in which the user will provide the values. So here we have seen how to read one value. If you want to read multiple values, then all you have to do is specify the way the user will provide the input. In this case, he will enter three integer numbers. So I will use %d space %d space %d. Now what we have to do? We have to specify where the read values should be stored. Here, the first value that will be read by this scanf function from the standard input should be stored in this num1 variable, and then the second value that will be read from the user should be stored in this num2 variable, and then the third value should be stored in this num3 variable. We are just specifying the way user has to provide the input here, and then we are reading the values and we are storing them in these three variables. Now here, the first value I have mentioned the num1 variable, for the second value I have mentioned num2, and for the third value I have mentioned num3. It can be in any order depending on your program. Now, this is not because I have declared num1 first, num2 later, num3 later. Now here, depending on the way the user will enter the value, depending on in which variables you want to store the values, you can specify the variables. For example, I can say num3, num2, and num1, something like this. Now here, the first value read will be stored in this num3, second value in num2, third value in num1. Okay. Now finally, I will use a printf function and I will display these values. Okay, just displaying these three values. Now I will save this program and I will run this. Now it says enter 3 integers. Now how I can provide the values? Now here I will enter the value 20 and then I have to separate the values. Now in order to separate the values, I can use a space or a tab or a new line. New line is the enter key. For example, here I will hit the enter key and then I will enter the second number 54, and then I will hit the enter key and I will enter the third number, which is 87. Now if I hit the enter button, what happened here is the first value I have entered is 20 and that is read by the scanf function and it has stored that in this num3 variable. So num3 is 20, 54 is the second value that I have entered and that is stored in this num2 variable, and then we have entered 87, the third value, and that has been stored in this num1 variable. So here we can see num1 is containing 87, num2 is containing 54, and num3 is containing 20. Now here I will run it one more time, and now here while providing the input I can use as many spaces I want to separate them. For example, I can have multiple spaces like this, and then I will insert a lot of new line, and then I will enter the second value, then again I will insert a lot of new line, and then I will enter the third value. When I hit the enter button, it will display the values properly. If I have a whitespace character, which is nothing but a tab, space, or a new line, it will be ignored. Now here, what if I don't use the spaces to separate the format specifiers? I will remove these spaces. I will save the program and I will run it. And this time I will enter the first value and then I will have a lot of spaces to separate the second value. Then I will enter the second value and then I will have a lot of spaces and new lines, something like this, and then I will enter the third value. Now if I hit the enter button, what it does is it reads the proper values. The reason for that is because of this format specifiers used. For example, a space or a tab or a new line are not part of a number. So here we are scanning for the numbers, and that's why it will ignore all those characters. It only scans for the numbers. Now here, if the tab, space, or a new line is part of the character that we are reading, then we should use a space here between the values and separate them. This is very important. Why? We will learn about that later in this video. So here, remember that if you're taking multiple inputs using a single scanf function, you should separate them by using a space in the format string. Now here we are reading only one type of value. If you want, we can read multiple types of values and store in these variables. For example, I will get rid of this num3 variable, and here I will create a variable. I will call this as num3, but it will be of type double. Now here what I will do is, after reading these two integer numbers, I will read the double value. For that I will use the format specifier %lf, and then I have to properly mention the variables. So the first one is of type integer, second one is of type integer, and the third variable is of type double. So I have done that, and then we will display the value here using the printf. Now what I'm doing here is using a single scanf function, I'm reading multiple types of values. Now before running, I will change the message, enter to integer and a double. I will save this program and I will run this, and this time it says enter two integers and a double. So I will enter 22, I will separate it by a space, I will enter 44, I will separate it by a space, and then I will enter 88.82. If I hit the enter button, it will display num1 is 44, num2 is 0, num3 is 88.82. Now why we get num2 as 0? Because we have not mentioned this num2 variable here. In both the cases, we have mentioned num1. Now this is also valid. There is no issue with this particular code, but because of that, num1 is containing the latest value that the scanf function has assigned. Now this wasn't planned, just happened, but you got to learn something new. Now here I will change this one to num2, and then if I save and run this program, then here I will enter 55, 44 and 63.63, and you guys can see values are displayed properly now. Now here, what if we are reading a character value along with all these numbers? Then what happens? Now here, instead of this num3, I will declare a character variable. I will call it as letter, and I will store lowercase z in this variable. Now we will say enter to integer and a char value. Okay, and then here we have to specify the format specifier %c, and it will be the address of this variable letter for this last format specifier, and while printing we will display the letter variable's value. Again, the format specifier will be %c. Now what happens if I save this program and if I run this? I have to enter two integer and a char value. So I will enter 22, and then I will use a space, 33 space, and then I will enter a, and if I hit the enter button, you guys can see it is working. Now here is the interesting part. What if we don't use the space to separate these inputs? Then what happens? I will save this program and I will run this. Enter two integer and a char value. So I will enter 55. I will use a space to separate. I will enter 66. I will use a space to separate. I can use multiple spaces if I want. And then I will enter, let us say, uppercase T. Now if I hit the enter button, what do we see? Num1 is 55, num2 is 66, num3 is nothing. Actually, it should have been letter. I forgot to update that. Sorry about that. Here we are displaying the value of this letter variable, but I forgot to change the name to letter here. Now it is displaying nothing, but while providing the input, I have entered T. If anyone getting confused here, I will close this and run it one more time. I have to enter two integer and a char value. I will enter 66 space. I will use multiple space, and then 88. I will use multiple space, and then I will enter uppercase T. If I hit the enter button, then what happens? We get 66, 88 properly, but the letter variable is containing a space and it is not storing this T. Why? According to the format that we have mentioned in this format string, the scanf function scans for the user input. So when I entered 66, and then when I have multiple spaces in here, the scanf function is looking for a number, and spaces are not part of the number. and that's why it ignores these spaces. Okay, and then it reads 88, which is a number. And after that, what type of value we are reading? A character. And then here, while providing the input, I have entered space. A space is a character. It matches, and that's why scanf function reads that space and then it stores that in this letter variable. Here we may not see anything, but it is displaying a space, which is an invisible character, and that's why we get the input like this. So what we have to do in order to solve this problem, for that we will have spaces in here. Now we have the spaces which are separating these format specifiers. If I save and run this program, what happens now? I will enter 88, have a lot of space, and then 66, have a lot of space, and then I will enter uppercase U. Now if I hit the enter button, you guys can see num1 is 88, num2 is 66, letter is U. What happened is, after entering the first value, we have a space. The space that is used in the format string of this scanf function, it has some special effect. What it does is, it matches with multiple new line, tab or space characters. So after providing a value, if I have multiple spaces, then the format string that I have here, it will match all of them so that the scanf function can ignore them. Then I have entered 66, which is read for this %d. And then we have a space here in the format string. So it matches all these spaces that have entered in the user input. So this will be ignored. And then we have the %c, which reads this U. And that's why the letter variable gets the character U. Now, finally, one more thing that we will talk here is, if you're taking the input for a character type or a string type, which we'll discuss later in this video series, then you should always use a space before the format specifier for the character or a string type. For example, here, if you're reading a character along with other input, or if you are individually reading one single character using a scanf, then also it is a very good practice to use a space before the format specifier for the character or string. So this is it guys for this particular video. If you guys have any confusion, comment it out. I'll try to help. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later in the next one.